Is Moses Itauma really that good? Hello, welcome to On Me Ed's Son podcast, or the podcast from On Me Ed's Son, whichever way you want to describe it. So I'm going to be producing a whole load of video and audio podcasts for the channel. You can find them on Spotify and Apple as well, certainly the audio ones, and you'll find them right here on the YouTube channel as well. Now, one of the questions that I'm asking on this podcast, this is a boxing show it's a sporting show really, but for this particular show, I'm going to be talking about boxing and Moses Itauma, the young kid who everybody's tipping to be the next heavyweight world champion. He's an exciting kid. He's got lots of talent, great movement, tremendous power, and he's knocking them down like flies. But I think I kind of feel that lots of people, the pundits especially, and they tend to do this in modern times, especially on this side of the pond, the British pundits, they're getting a bit carried away for me. They're getting a bit carried away for Moses Itauma because there are some sensible voices out there, and they're asking, well, who has he fought? Who has he knocked over? Who he hasn't actually come up against anybody that's really been able to challenge him. Now, that's to be expected, right? He's a 12-0 boxer now. And his next fight, they've lined up with Dillian Whyte. Now, Dillian Whyte, it really depends how you gauge Dillian Whyte. Yeah, he had some great performances. He's got some great knockout power. But his last two performances have been pretty dire for me, absolutely dire. The fight he had in Northern Ireland, it was about 10 months ago now, wasn't it? And then the other fight he had, it was just, they were really poor. Now he's had his problems with testing positive and stuff like that, and for many people he shouldn't be boxing at all. But we are where we are with him. He had a title shot against Tyson Fury. He didn't fare too well there. I mean, Tyson Fury just kept him at arm's length really, and it was easy for him. So the question is, can Moses Itauma, can he fight somebody like Dillian Whyte and put on a good show? Well, there's a good chance that he could easily win this because Dillian Whyte just might not be that guy anymore, or might not be at the level. And, you got to judge his past two performances. He's just been really that poor. Now, if he's that good, he would have put his opposition away pretty easily, and he didn't. He made a bit of a basket out of it, really. But Moses Itauma, Tauma is a totally different proposition, of course. So you're kind of thinking, well, is this really a good matchup? Or is it a terrible matchup for both fighters for different reasons? Is it a terrible matchup for Moses Itauma, who's actually, they put him in with a live one, with an old head there, an old boxing head, who's going to take him to school and really show him up? Or is this a totally wrong matchmaking for Dillian Whyte? Because all of a sudden you're going to come up against a live kid here who's really, have no fear. The tactics aren't really going to be there. The strategy isn't going to be there. He's just basically just going to go for you. He's just going to headhunt you. And that's essentially what Moses Itauma does. Now, every time I've seen Moses Itauma fight, just like every boxer, as an observer outside the ring looking in, you're thinking to yourself, look, if he comes up against a live one, if he comes up against a boxer of elite standard, or certainly in top 10, then you kind of think, you're going to get caught here. You're going to get caught. You're leaving yourself wide open to get caught in certain transitions, in certain moments. Now, that's all it takes. If we take the Fabio Wardley fight last weekend, or whenever it was, when he was fighting Justice Huni, wasn't he? He was losing that fight. He's being totally outboxed. But it just takes a split second for a right hand to land, to catch you right on the temple, around the back of the ear, or square on the chin, in this case, was Fabio Wardley. And that's it. It's good night, Vienna. So that's all it takes. That's all it takes for, especially in the heavyweight division. We're constantly being told this in the heavyweight division, and it's so true. The reason why you don't have this in the lower weight divisions, certainly when you get into the lightweight divisions, because they're so technically good, the boxers. and they were like world level elite. And I'm talking when you get into the world level elite, that even if they get caught square on the chops, they can usually take it because the power isn't that great. But when you get into the higher weight divisions, it's certainly cruiser and certainly into heavyweight and certainly into the bigger heavyweights, that's all it takes, one big power punch. So Moses Itauma has definitely got that, but he's just a young kid, and that's the thing. Now you could say, well, Mike Tyson was just a kid. Yes, he was, but also, there was differences there. There's differences between what Moses Itauma is and what Mike Tyson was. And the problem is that Moses Itauma hasn't actually been tested yet, whereas Mike Tyson was already being put in with the elite of the era, and he was already knocking them down, whereas Moses Itauma hasn't. Now, this is great, career development by Frank Warren, but for everybody to get carried away to say, look, he is fantastic. He is the second coming of boxing, as it were. He's going to knock everybody over. He's going to be world champion. Just hold on a minute. Just hold on a minute. Let's just see where we're at. Now, as I say, this could be the worst matchmaking or could be the best matchmaking. It could be great for Dillian Whyte. It could be great for Moses Itauma. But let's just say he goes in against Dillian Whyte and he bashes him out there 2 or 3 rounds. Let's just say he does that, right? Well, who next? What, do you give him a world title shot? What, on the basis of beating Dillian Whyte, you give him a world title shot? Well, the thing is, Dillian Whyte is nowhere near world title positioning. So, he's nowhere near that. I know rankings are one thing and, it might be number 1 here and that kind of thing. But just because you beat Dillian Whyte, it doesn't mean that you're any step nearer. So who does he go in afterwards? Well, if let's say you put him in against a Caballero, you put him in against Joseph Parker, again, all it takes is one clean punch and it could be good night Vienna. So he could easily do it. But there's a difference between potentially easily being able to do it and actually being able to do it. So I think there's a massive gulf between the likes of the standard and the levels of where Dillian Whyte is now. And we're talking now and not where he was, 5 years ago, whatever. We're talking now, where he is now, and what that means for Moses Itauma in terms of career development. Now, I think that they could have put him in with better live opponents who are on their way up as well. I'm a big fan of this lad from, where is he from? New Zealand, Terra Moana. I think he's with Matchroom, isn't he? Great. He's knocking them down as well. Now, if you want to have a bit of a test between 2 up-and-coming fighters, because that's all Moses Itauma is now. He's an up-and-coming fighter, right? That's a great test. Those 2. And Terra Moana just leaves himself wide open. Now, for me, I would say if I have to put my money on out of those 2 who would come out on top, I would put my money on Moses Itauma because I think he's just a better skilled boxer. But of what I've seen. But in terms of those 2, a matchup, they look really, really good. And they're similar levels, similar kind of records, knocking their opposition down, no issues. And I think that's where Moses Itauma is at. I think we've built him up. The pundits, the media, the promoters have built him up to be something that he hasn't quite yet achieved. Now, you could argue that's the same for any boxer. That's the same for any sportsman. They're not at a level of achievement until they actually achieve it, until they get into the ring in the case of boxing, until they actually get into the ring with a live opponent. I get it. That's exactly what I'm saying. Because he hasn't achieved that yet. And I don't think that getting in with Dillian Whyte actually achieves much anyway. Because I think the last 2 performances from Dillian Whyte have been pretty poor. He hasn't really been active and he's a lot older as well. Now, you could say, well, is his fitness going to be there? Is his commitment there? All the boxes that you want ticked, and you think, well, there's a few unanswered questions there for me. Moses Itauma, great student of the game, by all accounts, he's fantastic in training. He's fantastic in sparring, and he is a handful. There's no doubt that this kid is an actual prospect. He's a real deal. There's no doubt about it. But he's a real deal as a prospect. He's a real deal at getting to a position where you can build his career. And this is where I'm at with Moses Itauma. He's fantastic to watch, but they've put him in with fighters that just don't offer a lot of resistance. It doesn't mean, they don't offer a lot of punch resistance either. Then let's just say then you put him in with somebody who has all that, who can take a punch, who can move around the ring a lot, or who can just stand there and trade blows, but their shots are even harder than yours. Then all of a sudden you could get into a situation where you'll have a lot of egg on your face because you've put him in with an opponent too early, because you bought into the hype, you bought into the movement, you bought into the momentum of Moses Itauma knocking everybody down, and then you put him in with somebody who's going to take him out pretty easily, or make him look really stupid, or make him look like a prospect, which he is, and then you've kind of scuppered that momentum. Whereas if you'd not done that, you'd place him in with increasingly better opponents and get him to a stage. Look, we've already missed the situation where he was going to be the youngest ever world champion heavyweight boxer, beating Mike Tyson's record, of course. You've missed that. So if that wasn't the deal, if that wasn't the main driver anymore, then there's no need to rush him. There's no need to rush him into something that he just doesn't need to be. He can be champion in another 5 6 years, and you can get some really good, solid fights under his belt and just incrementally build him up. For me, whilst this is an interesting matchup against Dillian White, this is a difficult one for Moses Itauma to navigate, because it really depends which Dillian White turns up. If the old wily fox of Dillian White turns up with purpose, with power, with a good tactical game plan, then I could see Moses Itauma getting beating quite heavily here. But if he doesn't, then he beats a very poor Dillian White. Then for me, that doesn't achieve anything. All that means is that you've beaten a name from the past who just isn't at it anymore. That doesn't mean anything to me. You should not be in that. We shouldn't be asking this question of a fighter that has really had lots of poor performances recently and hasn't really fought a lot in the last few years. And obviously there's, the bans, that we have to consider as well, and all that kind of stuff. So putting him in with Dillian White, I personally think is bad matchmaking. Because I don't think it really achieves a lot. I don't think it really achieves a lot for either fighter. I think, for Dillian White, if you're trying to get your name and get the big fights out there in the future, and you come and beat a prospect, yes, there's a lot of hype around Moses Itauma. There's a lot of push and momentum for Moses Itauma right now. But if you beat him, I don't think that does anything for your career. I don't think that does anything for you to get the next big fight. Now, you could say, well, if I beat him, then I could line up a money fight against Deontay Wilder or something like that, who's trying to, come back and fight again. Okay, you could say that. But they're not big fights, are they? Because you're picking yourself up against an opponent, but most people think is finished anyway. So who else do you go against? What does that mean, that you can go in with Joe Parker? Do you think you can go in with Caballero? Does that make you the number one contender for the contender spot, as it were? Again, I just don't think it does, or I don't think your position justifies it. Now, could you say, well, I beat Moses Itauma, Fabio Wardley's just had a fight there, let's see if we can put in with Fabio Wardley, and I think, there's a risk there. There's a real risk for Fabio Wardley. There's a real risk for Dillian White if he beats Moses Itauma. And I think, yeah, okay. But then, this is my position. If you're a Fabio Wardley, if you're a Caballero, if you're a Joseph Parker, would I, at my position, right on the verge of fighting for a world title fight, especially if the belts all fracture after the unification or the undisputed fight with Dubois and Usyk, would I, give Moses Itauma or even Dillian White a chance? I personally wouldn't. I think, well, especially Moses Itauma, because he's going to come in similarly to what Dubois has done in the last few fights, especially what he did to AJ. Just went in there, no fear, all purpose, bull in a china shop, went straight there, headhunted, and basically just flatlined AJ. And Moses could easily do that. As I say, we're talking about the heavyweight division here. If we were talking about a Moses Itauma in a lightweight division, you said, well, he's still a prospect, and he wouldn't be able to carry that power to be a threat to anybody. They just school him in boxing because he's still got a long way to go. Yes, he's a student of the game. Yes, there's lots of great stuff coming from the camp. Yes, there's lots of great information coming out of Ben Davison, and other people like that. But it doesn't mean that he's at any kind of level beyond prospect. So, would you, risk anything in terms of a heavyweight fighter who's got punch power, who's got a great track record so far, just knocking fighters over within the first 3 or 4 rounds, let's say, then all of a sudden, bring him into you? Now, you could say, well, yeah, I will, because I'm going to school this kid and what it means to be at the elite level. Or you're going to say, well, it does nothing for me. This is what Fabio Wardley was saying after the fight with Justice Hooney about the rematch. Because people were saying, well, you should have a rematch here. Well, he said, look, I beat him. Regardless of what, people say, I beat him. It doesn't do anything for my career to have a rematch here. Let's just move on. Let's just go on to the next one. And I totally get it. I totally agree. You shouldn't really be doing that. What you should be doing is just focusing on the next step, focusing on the next opponent. That's going to get you up the ladder. That's going to take you to the next rung. And I think right now we're in a bit of a weird situation right now, or a bit of a funny time where we're getting elite level boxers or boxers who are in positions, elite positions, let's say, number 1 contenders, number 1 in the rankings, that are holding interim bouts. And they're kind of hoping to get world title shots within the next few months, let's say. But at the same time, there's a void, so they need to be kept active. And it's almost like that they need to sort of pick and choose lesser opponents here. Because let's face it, they don't want to go... what I'd love to see Cabello against Joseph Parker, as a fantastic fight. But in terms of both of their careers, both of their opportunities to get world title shots, that's a bad move. You don't want that fight. You don't want Fabio Wardley fighting those two. I'd love to see them fight. But in terms of positioning right now, it's a bad move. So they have to come down the ladder. So, who do you fight? Well, AJ's not in the mix right now, you could say Bacoli, you could say Jagba, you could say all those second-tier boxers that haven't really achieved anything yet, that haven't really got up there. Or then you come down the pecking order, you go like a Jared Anderson. And then you get into somebody like Moses Itauma as well, who's bringing a lot of weight with him, bringing a lot of momentum, bringing a lot of hype. But it doesn't mean that they're ready for it. And that's the problem. You could see big fights or big opportunities for prospect fighters because the elite fighters, or the fighters who are in elite positions right now, just need to box. They just need to be kept active. And that's where the risk can come from them, because they might be a little bit complacent here. They might say, okay, I just need a bit of a tune-up fight. Then all of a sudden they make the wrong matchmaking, they pick the wrong opponent, and all of a sudden they could get found out really easily. And that's the problem with the matchmaking right now. And I think this is the wrong matchmaking for both fighters for different reasons. And Moses Itauma against Dillian Whyte, I think there's a lot of risk for Dillian Whyte here. And if he goes in and he gets embarrassed by Moses Itauma, that'll be the end of his career. That will definitely be the end of his career. Now, could he or should he be able to handle Moses Itauma? He should be able to do it. Of what I've seen of Moses Itauma, he definitely should be able to deal with his rawness and deal with his movement and deal with his power. But again, as I say, it comes back to what kind of Dillian Whyte is going to come to this fight. Is he going to be motivated? Is he going to be well trained? Is he going to be physically fit enough to deal with the Moses Itauma? Or is he gonna be? Is it gonna be like a Strickland Violet in there? And is Moses Itauma actually gonna be that guy who says, "Right, old man, I'm gonna knock your block off here"? For both fighters, there's a lot of jeopardy here, but for Dillian Whyte, he needs those last remaining big fights. Moses Itauma doesn't need this big fight right now, and that's the problem, because it just doesn't achieve anything. It doesn't achieve anything in terms of stepping up. Now, it could, don't get me wrong, it could achieve everything that he wants, because that's the absurdity of boxing. All of a sudden you beat somebody and everybody thinks, oh yeah, that's a great name to have a win over. And then you think, well, hold on a minute, he's well past his sell-by date. But that doesn't matter in boxing sometimes. All of a sudden, it's just the name. You've beaten somebody who was once a contender, who had world title level, and then all of a sudden, he's no more. So therefore, I'm so great. The problem is here that the next step after Dillian Whyte, you could be easily found out. And what does that do for your career? Because you've overhyped a fighter. And similarly to what was happening with Jared Anderson in the United States, they were overhyping him a little bit until he came up against Martin Bakole, who just totally schooled him. Totally schooled him in that ring. In Los Angeles, wasn't it, last year? Totally schooled him. And, he was made to look really weak and really ordinary. And this could easily happen to Moses Itauma. And I'm not saying Jared Anderson and Moses Itauma are the same comparable fighters. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is they could come up against, somebody who can take a punch and definitely could deliver a punch. In the case of Martin Bakole, that night, that day, as it turned out to be in the afternoon fight, he's not a great mover. We know what Martin Bakole is. I mean, he comes in overweight and all that kind of stuff. But he was a little bit lighter there. I think he was about 275, something like that. That's where he should be. Not coming in way over 300 pounds. Certainly not coming in at 310 or whatever he was in his last fight against the Jagbar. He and also against Joseph Parker, he shouldn't have taken that fight. But money talks and bullshit walks at the end of the day. That's why he's taking those fights. But look, even as somebody like Martin Bakole, who lots of people are overhyping a little bit, and I was one of those, and I am still one of those as well, because I think of the matchmaking for Martin Bakole, get the right one, and, you could do some damage there. But, he proved against Jared Anderson, who was being overhyped, to say, look, hold on, come in against somebody who could take a punch and deliver a punch and doesn't have to move that much. And all of a sudden, you're going to be found out. And that's exactly what happened to Jared Anderson. And this is exactly what happened to Moses Itauma. I think he is really that good, Moses Itauma. I really do. I just don't think he's at the level that we should be getting overly excited about. Yes, get excited as a prospect, but not just putting him into these big fights. But we don't know until he actually is put into those big fights. Could this be the one? I'd be interested to see what Moses Itauma does in the next 4 fights. And, does that say, okay, right, beat Dillian Whyte, then you beat somebody else in the top 10, or maybe a couple of others in the top 10, and then we can really see where he's at. But right now, I don't think he's really beaten anybody to stake a claim. Anyway, if you like what I do here, just keep on listening to these podcasts. And there might be some audio podcasts, be some video podcasts coming out on the channel very, very soon. You can find the audio podcast on the Spotify, on Me Ed Son, and also on Apple podcasts as well. And, with that, I'll catch you again on another podcast coming very soon on Me Ed Son. But Moses Itauma, is he really that good? Well, yet to be determined, I would say. Yet to be determined. Catch you again. Bye now.